welcome to Sqoop Tutorial. My name is Richard Kirshner. I am with the Simplilearn team. That's www.simplilearn.com. Get certified, get ahead. Today we're going to dive in on Sqoop, one of the many features of the Hadoop ecosystem for the Hadoop file system. What's in it for you? Today we're going to cover the need for Sqoop, what is Sqoop, Sqoop features, Sqoop architecture, Sqoop import, Sqoop export, Sqoop processing, and then finally we'll have a little hands-on demo on Sqoop so you can see what it looks like. So where does the need for Sqoop come in our big data Hadoop file system? Processing huge volumes of data requires loading data from diverse sources into Hadoop cluster. And you can see here we have our data processing, and this process of loading data from the heterogeneous sources comes with a set of challenges. So what are the challenges? Maintaining data consistency, ensuring efficient utilization of resources, especially when you're talking about big data. We can certainly use up the resources when importing terabytes and petabytes of data over the course of time. Loading bulk data to Hadoop was not possible. This is one of the big challenges that came up when they first had the Hadoop file system going. And loading data using script was very slow. In other words, you'd write a script in whatever language you were in, and then it would very slowly load each piece and parse it in. So the solution? Sqoop. Sqoop helped in overcoming all the challenges to traditional approach and could lead bulk data from RDBMS to Hadoop very easily. So think your enterprise server, you want to take the from MySQL or your SQL, and you want to bring that data into your Hadoop warehouse, your data filing system. And that's where Sqoop comes in. So what exactly is Sqoop? Sqoop is a tool used to transfer bulk of data between Hadoop and external data stores, such as relational databases, and MySQL Server, or the Microsoft SQL Server, or MySQL Server. So Sqoop equals SQL plus Hadoop. And you can see here where we have our RDBMS, all the data we have stored on there, and then your Sqoop is the middle ground, and it brings the import into the Hadoop file system. It also is one of the features that goes out and grabs the data from Hadoop and exports it back out into an RDBMS. Let's take a look at Sqoop features. Sqoop features has parallel import and export. It has import results of SQL query, connectors for all major RDBMS databases, Kerberos security integration, provides full and incremental load. So when we look at parallel import and export, Sqoop uses Yarn, yet another resource negotiator, framework to import and export data. This provides fault tolerance on top of parallelism. Sqoop allows us to import the result returned from an SQL query into the Hadoop file system, or the HDFS. And you can see here where the import results of SQL query come in. Sqoop provides connectors for multiple relational database management system, RDBMSs, databases, such as MySQL and Microsoft SQL Server. And it has connectors for all major RDBMS databases. Sqoop supports Kerberos, Computer Network Authentication Protocol, that allows nodes communicating over a non-secure network to prove their identity to one another in a secure manner. Sqoop can load the whole table or parts of the table by a single command. Hence, it supports full and incremental load. Let's dig a little deeper into the Sqoop architecture. We have our client, in this case a hooded wizard behind his laptop. You never know who's going to be accessing the Hadoop cluster. And the client comes in and sends their command, which goes into Sqoop. The client submits the import-export command to import or export data. Data from different databases is fetched by Sqoop. And so you have our enterprise data warehouse, document-based systems. You have connector for your data warehouse, a connector for document-based systems, which reaches out to those two entities. And we have our connector for the RDBMS. So connectors help in working with a range of popular databases. Multiple mappers perform map tasks to load the data onto HDFS, the Hadoop file system. And you can see here we have the map task. If you remember from Hadoop, Hadoop is based on MapReduce. Because we're not reducing the data, we're just mapping it over, it only accesses the mappers, and it opens up multiple mappers to do parallel processing. And you can see here the HDFS HBase high is where the target is for this particular one. Similarly, multiple map tasks will export the data from HDFS onto RDBMS using Sqoop export command. So just like you can import it, you can now export it using the multiple map routines. Sqoop import. So here we have our RDBMS data store, and we have the folders on there. So maybe it's your company's database, maybe it's an archive at Google with all the searches going on, whatever it is. Usually you think with Sqoop, you think SQL, you think MySQL Server or Microsoft SQL Server, that kind of setup. So it gathers the metadata, and you see the Sqoop import. So introspect database to gather metadata, primary key information. And then it submits. So you can see submits map only job. Remember we talked about map reduce? It only needs the map side of it because we're not reducing the data, we're just mapping it over. Sqoop divides the input data set into splits and uses individual map tasks to push the splits into HDFS. So right into the Hadoop file system. And you can see down on the right is kind of a small depiction of a Hadoop cluster. And then you have Sqoop export. So we're going to go the other direction. And with the other direction, you have your Hadoop file system storage, which is your Hadoop cluster. You have your Sqoop job, and each one of those clusters then gets a map. The mapper comes out to each one of the computers that has data on it. So the first step is you've got to gather the metadata. So step 1, you gather the metadata. Step 2, submits map only job. Introspect database to gather metadata, primary key information. Sqoop divides the input dataset into splits and uses individual map tasks to push the splits to RDBMS. Sqoop will export Hadoop files back to RDBMS tables. And you can think of this in a number of different manners. One of them would be if you're restoring a backup from the Hadoop file system into your enterprise machines. There's certainly many others as far as exploring data and data science. So as we dig a little deeper into Sqoop input, we have our connect, our JDBC, and our URL. So specify the JDBC connect string. Connecting manager, we specify the connection manager class to use. You can see here driver with the class name, manually specify the JDBC driver class to use. Hadoop map reduce home directory, override Hadoop mapped home, username, set authentication username, and of course help, print usage instructions. And with the export, you'll see that we can specify the JDBC connect string, specify the connection manager class to use, manually specify JDBC driver class to use. You do have to let it know to override the Hadoop map reduce home, and that's true on both of these, and set authentication username, and finally you can print out all your help setup. So you can see the format for Sqoop is pretty straightforward, both import and export. So let's continue on our path and look at Sqoop processing and what the computer goes through for that. And when we talk about Sqoop processing, first Sqoop runs in the Hadoop cluster. It imports data from the RDBMS, the NoSQL database, to the Hadoop file system. So remember, it might not be importing the data from a RDBMS, it might actually be coming from a NoSQL, and there's many out there. It uses mappers to slice the incoming data into multiple formats and load the data into HDFS. It exports data back into an RDBMS while making sure that the schema of the data in the database is maintained. So now that we've looked at the basic commands in our Sqoop and the Sqoop processing, or at least the basics as far as theory is concerned, let's just jump in and take a look at a demo on Sqoop. For this demo, I'm going to use our Cloudera Quick Start. If you've been watching our other demos we've done, you'll see that we've been using that pretty consistently. Certainly this will work in any of your Horton Sandbox, which is also a single node testing machine. Cloudera is one of them. There's a Docker version instead of VirtualBox. And you can also set up your own Hadoop cluster. Plan a little extra time. If you're not an admin, it's actually a pretty significant endeavor. For an admin, if you've been adminning Linux machines for a very long time, and you know a lot of the commands, I find it for most admins it takes them about 2 to 4 hours the first time they go in and create a virtual machine and set up their own Hadoop. In this case though, when you're just learning and getting set up, best to start with Cloudera. Cloudera also includes an installed version of MySQL. That way you don't have to worry about installing the SQL version for importing data from and to. Once you're in the Cloudera Quick Start, you'll see it opens a nice CentOS Linux interface, and it has the desktop set up on there. This is really nice for learning, so you're not just looking at command lines. And from in here, it should open up by default to Hue. If not, you can click on Hue. Hue's a kind of a fun little web-based interface. Under Hue, I can go under Query, I can pick an editor, and we'll go right down to Sqoop. So now I'm just going to load the Sqoop editor in our Hue. Now I'm going to switch over and do this all in command line. I just want to show that you can actually do this in Hue through the web-based interface. The reason I like to do the command line is specifically on my computer, it runs much quicker. Or if I do the command line here and I run it, it tends to have an extra lag or an added layer in it. So for this, we're going to go ahead and open our command line. The second reason I do this is we're going to need to go ahead and edit our MySQL so we have something to scoop in. Otherwise, I don't have anything going in there. And of course, we'll zoom in this and increase the size of our screen. So for this demo, our hands-on, I'm going to use Oracle VirtualBox Manager and the Cloudera Quick Start. If you're not familiar with this, we do have another tutorial we put out, and you can send a note in the YouTube video below and let our team know, and they'll send you a link. Or come visit www.Simplilearn.com. Now this creates a Linux box on my Windows computer, so we're going to be in Linux, and it'll be the Cloudera version with Sqoop. It will also be using MySQL server. Once inside the Cloudera VirtualBox, we'll go under the Hue editor. Now we're going to do everything in terminal window, but I just want you to be aware that under the Hue editor, you can go under Query Editor, and you'll see as we come down here, here's our Sqoop on this. So you can run your Sqoop from in here. Now before we do this, we have to do a little exploration in MySQL, a MySQL server. That way we know what data is coming in. So let me go ahead and open up a terminal window. In Cloudera, you have a terminal window at the top here that you can just click on and open it up. And let me just go ahead and zoom in on here. We'll go View and Zoom in. Now to get into MySQL server, you simply type in MySQL, and this part will depend on your setup. Now the Cloudera Quick Start comes up that the username is root and the password is Cloudera. Kind of a strange quirk is that you can put a space between the -u and the root, but not between the -p and the Cloudera. Usually you'd put in a -P and then it prompts you for your password on here. For this demo, I don't worry too much about you knowing the password on that, so we'll just go right into MySQL server since this is the standard password for this quick start. And you can see we're now into MySQL. And we're going to do just a couple of quick commands in here. There's show databases, and you follow by the semicolon. That's standard in most of these shell commands, so it knows it's the end of your shell command. And you'll see in here in the Quick Start, Cloudera Quick Start, the MySQL comes with a standard set of databases. These are just, some of these have to do like with the Uzi, which is the Uzi part of Hadoop, where others of these like customers and employees and stuff like that, those are just for demo purposes. They come as a standard setup in there so that people going in for the first time have a database to play with, which is really good for us so we don't have to recreate those databases. And you will see on the list here we have a retail_db. And then we can simply do use retail_db. This will set that as a default in MySQL. And then we want to go ahead and show the tables. And if we show the tables, you can see under the database, the retail DB database, we have categories, customers, departments, order items, orders, products. So there's a number of tables in here. And we're going to go ahead and just use a standard SQL command. And if you did our Hive language, you'll note, remember it's the same for HQL also on this. We're just going to select star everything from departments. So there's our departments table, and we're going to list everything on the departments table. And you'll see we have about 6 lines in here, and it has a department ID and a department name. 2 for fitness, 3 for footwear, so on and so forth. Now at this point, I can just go ahead and exit, but it's kind of nice to have this data up here so we can look at it and flip back and forth between the screens. So I'm going to open up another terminal window, and we'll go ahead and zoom in on this also. And it isn't too important for this particular setup, but it's always kind of fun to know what your setup you're working with. What is your host name? And so we'll go ahead and just type that in. This is a Linux command, and it's hostname -f, and you see we're on Quick Start Cloudera. No surprise there. Now this next command is going to be a little bit longer because we're going to be doing our first Sqoop command. And I want to do 2 of them. We're going to list databases and list tables. It's going to take just a moment to get through this because there's a bunch of stuff going on here. So we have Sqoop, we have list databases, we have connect. And under the connect command, we need to let it know how we're connecting. We're going to use the JDBC. This is a very standard one, JDBC MySQL. So you'll see that if you're doing an SQL database, that's how you start it off with. And then the next part, this is where you have to go look it up. It's however it was created. So if your admin created a MySQL server with a certain setup, that's what you have to go by. And you'll see that usually they list this as localhost. So you'll see something like localhost sometimes. There's a lot of different formats, but the most common is either localhost or the actual connection. So in this case, we want to go ahead and do quick start 3306. And so quick start is the name of the localhost database and how it's hosted on here. And when you set up the quick start for Hadoop under Cloudera, it's port 3306 is where that's coming in. So that's where all that's coming from. And so there's our path for that. And then we have to put in our password. We type password, and if you look it up, password on the Cloudera quick start is Cloudera. And we have to also let it know the username. And again, if you're doing this, you'd probably put in a minus capital. You can actually just do it for a prompt for the password. So if you leave that out, it'll prompt you. But for this, doesn't really matter. I don't care if you see my password. It's the default one for Cloudera Quick Start. And then the username on here is simply root. And then we're going to put our semicolon at the end. And so we have here our full setup, and we go ahead and list the databases. And you'll see, you might get some warnings on here. I haven't run the updates on the Quick Start. I suggest you're not running the updates either if you're doing this for the first time, because it'll do some reformatting on there. And it quickly pops up, and you can see here's all of our the tables we went in there. And if we go back to on the previous window, we should see that these tables match. So here we come in, and here we have our databases, and you can see back up here where we had the CM, customers, employees, and so on. So the databases match. And then we want to go ahead and list the tables for a specific database. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm a very lazy typist, so I'll put the up arrow in. And you can see here, Sqoop list databases. We're just going to go back and change this from databases to list tables. So we want to list the tables in here. Same connection. So most of the connection is the same, except we need to know which tables we're listing. An interesting fact is you can create a table without being under a database. So if you left this blank, it will show the open tables that aren't connected directly to a database or under a database. But what we want to do is right past this last slash on the 3306, we want to put that retail underscore DB, because that's the database we're going to be working with. And this will go in there and show the tables listed under that database. And here we go. We got categories, customers, departments, order items, and products. If we flip back here real quick, there it is, the same thing we had. We had categories, customers, departments, order items, and so on. And so let's go ahead and run our first import command. And again, I'm that lazy typer, so we're going to do Sqoop, and instead of list tables, we want to go ahead and import. So there's our import command. And so once we have our import command in there, then we need to tell it exactly what we're going to import. So everything else is the same. We're importing from the retail DB, so we keep that. And then at the very end, we're going to tag on -- table. That tells it, so we can tell it what table we're importing from. And we're going to import departments. There we go. So this is pretty straightforward, because what's nice about this is you can see the commands are the same. I got the same connection. I change it for whatever database I'm in. Then I come in here, our password and the username are going to be the same. That's all under the MySQL server setup. And then we let it know what table we're entering in. We run this, and this is going to actually go through the mapper process in Hadoop. So this is a mapping process. It takes the data and it maps it up to different parts in the setup in Hadoop on there, and then saves that data into the Hadoop file system. And it does take it a moment to zip through, which I kind of skipped over for you, since it is running it's designed to run across a cluster, not on a single node. So when you're running on a single node, it's going to run slow, even if you dedicate a couple cores to it. I think I put dedicated 4 cores to this one. And so you can see right down here, we get to the end. It's now mapped in that information. And then we can go in here, we can go under, can flip back to our Hue. And under Hue, on the top, there's databases, and the second icon over is your Hadoop file system. And we can go in here and look at the Hadoop file system, and you'll see it show up underneath our documents. There it is, departments, Cloudera departments. And you can see there's always a delay when I'm working in Hue, which I don't like. And that's the quick start issue. That's not necessarily running it on a server. When I'm running it on a server, you pretty much have to run through some kind of server interface. I still prefer the terminal window. It still runs a lot quicker. But we'll flip back on over here to the command line, and we can do the Hadoop, type in the Hadoop FS, and then list -ls. And if we run this, you'll see underneath our Hadoop file system, there is our departments, which has been added in. And we can also do Hadoop FS, and this is kind of interesting. For those who've gone through the Hadoop file system, everything, you'll you'll recognize this on here. But I'm going to list the contents of departments. And you'll see underneath departments, we have part M 000, 001, 002, 003. And so this is interesting because this is how Hadoop saves these files. And this is in the file system. This is not in Hive. So we didn't directly import this into Hive. We put this in the Hadoop file system. Depending on what you're doing, you would then write the schema for Hive to look at the Hadoop file system. Certainly visit our Hive tutorial for more information on Hive specific. So you can see in here are different files that it forms that are part of departments. And we can do something like this. We can look at the contents of one of these files, fs minus ls, or a number of the files. And we'll simply do the full path, which is user Cloudera. And then we already know the next one is departments. And then after departments, we're going to put /part star. So this is going to say anything that has part in it. So we have part-m, 000, and so on. We can go ahead and use that cat command or that list command to bring those up. And then we can use the cat command to actually display the contents. And that's a Linux command, Hadoop Linux command, to catenate. Not to be confused with catatonic, catastrophic. There's a lot of cat got your tongue. And we see here fitness, footwear, apparel. That should look really familiar because that's what we had in our MySQL server. When we went in here, we did a select all on here. There it is. Fitness, footwear, apparel, golf, outdoors, and fan shop. And then, of course, it's really important, let's flip back on over here, to be able to tell it where to put the data. So we go back to our import command. So here's our Sqoop import. We have our connect. We have the DB underneath our connection, our MySQL server. We have our password, our username, the table where it's going to. The table where it's coming from. And then we can add a target on here. We can put in target dash directory, and you do have to put the full path. That's a Hadoop thing. It's a good practice to be in. And we're going to add it to department, we'll just do department 1. And so here we now add a target directory in here and user Cloudera department 1. And this will take just a moment before, so I'll go ahead and skip over the process since it's going to run very slowly. It's only running on, like I said, a couple cores, and it's also on a single node. And now we can do the Hadoop. Let's just do the up arrow. File system list. We want just straight list. And when we do the Hadoop file system minus ls or list, you'll see that we now have department 1. And we can, of course, do list department 1. And you can see we have the files inside department 1. And they mirrored what we saw before with the same files in there. The part MMO00 and so on. If we want to look at them, it'd be the same thing we did before with the cat. So, except instead of departments, we'd be department 1. There we go. And then that's going to come up with the same data we had before. Now, one of the important things when you're importing data, and it's always a question to ask, is do you filter the data before it comes in? Do we want to filter this data as it comes in so we're not storing everything in our file system? You would think Hadoop, big data, put it all in there. I know from experience that putting it all in there can turn a couple hundred terabytes into a petabyte very rapidly. And suddenly you're having to really add on to that data store, and you're storing duplicate data sometimes. So you really need to be able to filter your data out. And so let's go ahead and use our up arrow to go to our last import, since it's still a lot the same stuff. So we have all of our commands on our import. We have the target. We're going to change this to department 2. So we're going to create a new directory for this one. And then after departments, there's another command that we didn't really slide in here, and that's our mapping. And I'll show you what this looks like in a minute. But we're going to put M3 in there. That does have nothing to do with the filtering. I'll show you that in a second, though, what that's for. And we just want to put in where. So where, and what is the where? In this case, we want to know where department ID, and if you want to know where that came from, we can flip back on over here. We have department underscore IDs. This is where that's coming from. That's just the name of the column on here. And so we come in here to department ID is greater than 4. Simple logic there. You can see where you'd use that for maybe creating buckets for ages, age from 10 to 15, 20 to 30. You might be looking for, there's all kinds of reasons why you could use the where command on here and filter information out. Maybe you're doing word counting and you want to know words that are used less than 100 times. You want to get rid of the and is and all the stuff that's used over and over again. So we'll go ahead and put the where, and then department ID is greater than 4. We'll go ahead and hit enter on here, and this will create our Department 2 setup on this. And I'll go ahead and skip over some of the runtime. Again, it runs really slow on a single node. Real quick page through our commands. Let's see, here we go. Our list, and we should see underneath the list the Department 2 on here now, and there it is, Department 2, and then I can go ahead and do list Department 2. You'll see the contents in here, and you'll see that there is only 3 maps, and it could be that the data created 3 maps, but remember I set it up to only use 3 mappers. So there's 0, 1, and 2, and we can go ahead and do a cat on there. Remember, this is Department 2, so we want to look at all the contents of these 3 different files, and there it is. It's greater than 4, so we have golf is 5, outdoors 6, fan shop is 7. So we've effectively filtered out our data and just storing the data we want on our file system. So if you're going to store data on here, the next stage is to export the data. Remember, a lot of times you have MySQL Server and we're continually dumping that data into our long-term storage and access, the Hadoop file system. But what happens when you need to pull that data out and restore a database? Or maybe you have, you just merged with a new company, a favorite topic, merging companies and merging databases. That's listed under Nightmare, and how many different names for company can you have? So you can see where being able to export is also equally important, and let's go ahead and do that. And I'm going to flip back over to MySQL Server here, and we'll need to go ahead and create our database we're going to export into. Now, I'm not going to go too much in detail on this command. We're simply creating a table, and the table's going to have, it's pretty much the same table we already have in here from departments. But in this case, we're going to create a table called DEPT. So it's the same setup, but it's just we're just giving it a different name, a different schema. And so we've done that, and we'll go ahead and do a select star from DEPT. There we go, and it's empty. That's what we expect, a new database, a new data table, and it's empty in there. So now we need to go ahead and export our data that we just filtered out into there. So let's flip back on over here to our Sqoop setup, which is just our Linux terminal window. And let's go back up to one of our commands. Here's Sqoop import. In this case, instead of import, we're going to take the Sqoop and we're going to export. So we're going to just change that, export. And the connection is going to remain the same. So same connect, same database. We're still doing the retail DB. We have the same password, so none of that changes. The big change here is going to be the table. Instead of departments, remember we changed it and gave it a new name. And so we want to change it here also, DEPT. So department. We're not going to worry about the mapper count. And the where was part of our import. There we go. And then finally, it needs to know where to export from. So instead of target directory, we have an export directory. That's where it's coming from. Still user, Cloudera, and we'll keep it as department 2, just so you can see how that data is coming back with that we filtered in. And let's go ahead and run this. It'll take it just a moment to go through its steps. And again, because it's slow, I'm just going to go ahead and skip this so you don't have to sit through it. And once we've wrapped up our export, we'll flip back on over here to MySQL. Use the up arrow, and this time we're going to select star from department, and we can see that there it is. It exported the golf, outdoors, and fan shop. And you can imagine also that you might have to use the where command in your export also. So there's a lot of mixing. The command line for Sqoop is pretty straightforward. You're changing the different variables in there, whether you're creating a table, listing databases. Very powerful tool for bringing your data into the Hadoop file system and exporting it. So now that we've wrapped up our demo on Sqoop and gone through a lot of basic commands, that wraps it up for us today. I want to again thank you for joining us. My name is Richard Kirshner with the Simplilearn team. That is www.simplilearn.com. Please feel free to leave a post down below on the YouTube video. We do monitor the YouTube video posts, or come visit us at our website, www.simplilearn.com. Get certified, get ahead.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.